everyone. My name is Minal. I'm an architectural researcher and architect working in Karachi, and today I'm going to be representing Karachi Bachao Tehreek. And I'm going to be presenting our paper that we've written on Karachi's urban development, along with Adil Ayub, Maza Mohammed, and Hira Rasool, who are here with us today as well. So Karachi Bachao Tehreek is a movement of demolition-affected people and their allies. It comprises activists, lawyers, political workers, students as well, and of course the affectees of the recent mass evictions and demolitions in the city. So KBT works on ground, organizing with the mutasreen, the affectees, and gathering data on the very human cost of these demolitions and evictions. All right, next slide. All right, so the title of our paper is Development for Whom? Forced Evictions as a Technology of Neoliberal Governmentality. So referencing the philosopher Michel Foucault's concept of governmentality, which is essentially a concept that looks at the, okay, thank you. It's a concept that looks at the dispersal of power in a society. And the different mechanisms through which power seeps into the rationale of society. And all of the techniques through which subjects also self-govern. And as we will explore in the next slides, these are the narratives of exclusion, oftentimes not rooted in fact or reality, that are perpetuated through various different state institutions and mechanisms as a tool to displace the urban poor in Karachi, who are themselves victims of the crises related to urbanization and climate change that we are facing today. So the context basically is that in the monsoon period of 2020, Karachi was hit by unprecedented rainfall. So 484 millimeters or 19 inches, a 90-year-old record-breaking of rainfall, and all parts of the city reported casualties, including upscale neighborhoods. And the government then declares a state of emergency to avoid people from leaving the homes. And then the government says that the urban flooding that Karachi is facing is made worse by the fact that there are a lot of settlements along the paths of the nalas, the stormwater drains. And so they say that these settlements and housing need to be demolished. So that's been the government narrative. There was also a long-standing issue of encroachments in the city. So, going along with that trend, the Gujjar and Urangi Nala settlements were, forced into this conversation of encroachments and urban flooding, and the government narrative was that they need to be demolished to alleviate the urban flooding. Now, we know why Karachi floods. This is due to the work of many architects and surveying teams and civil engineers who've done extensive work on the kind of hydraulic engineering the city needs, and the sewerage and waste disposal systems that we need to have in place to alleviate flooding. So we have roughly 45 to 65 stormwater drains, or the main nalas, and then a few hundred smaller drains that feed into these main nalas. And there's a lot of actual encroachments on these smaller drains, which aren't seen as significant in the wider picture for some reason. But to put it simply and briefly, the drainage pathways and the drains themselves are blocked and made narrower by construction above it, oftentimes seen as legal. So now, here we have one of the main nalas, the Gujjar Nala, which follows a 13.5 kilometer long path leading to the sea. Now, what we noticed and what is very evident in this entire narrative of demolishing these settlements to alleviate flooding is that there's no emphasis on whether the route for the water to leave the city is blocked or not. So along this entire stretch to the sea, you will find actual encroachments and obstructions in terms of construction, but also exit points that are choked with sewerage because there was never a formal sewerage plan for the city. So this is based on the professional surveying teams and engineers that I have referenced before. One of them is the TTRC, the Technical Training Institute, headed by Mohammed Sirajuddin. And what their survey of Karachi basically shows is that all of these exit points are blocked or choked up. And we found that a lot of these permissible forms of encroachments were done by the state itself. But in the real world, an already marginalized community is incorrectly blamed for something they have a very small role in, or you could even argue very little, no role at all, actually. So now the questions that arise out of all of this is, why then is the state so adamant on doing away with these settlements that happen to be along the Nala spots? Could it have something to do with the fact that this is actually very valuable land, and that land is zoned based on how much it's worth in dollars or rupees and not on equitable development? How do these demolitions actually affect these communities, and then in general, the working class in general in Karachi? So that's what we wanted to know. We wanted to know the scale of the loss. And to do that, KBT has done their own survey, and we studied this through other mediums as well, which include accounts from the affectees themselves, who are an important part of KBT as an affectee-led movement. So our household survey comprised 24 questions aimed at assessing the economic social risk to affectees through the demolition drive, and we surveyed 350 people spanning 32 settlements from Gujjar Nala. The Mutasreen committees were directly involved in the survey along with the KBT data team, and they set up camps which people from the localities visited and were briefed on the forms before filling them out, and then the data was cleaned up and analyzed. So we also wanted to understand these links between informality and formality, and legality and illegality. We determined that several people had leases, right? So there were formal agreements between the issuing bodies, such as KMC, and the owner/the renter. And we concluded that almost all survey respondents had some form of documentation that the state accepted their home's legality, despite the language that was being used in the judiciary, in the media, and by politicians, which didn't take this fact into account at all. So to understand the failures of planning, where planning failed to achieve these formal systems of housing, sewerage, and waste disposal in Karachi's planning history, and what the overall outcomes of these failures of planning are, we looked at Gautam Band's planned illegalities from 2013, where he talks about how illegality itself becomes a part of planning. And we wanted to understand what constitutes legitimacy in the eyes of the government. And we found out that it was land that has been, formally designated for a particular purpose, but land that's not, necessarily legal. So using this as a lens, we know that the Pakistani government has recognized Kachi Abadis, the existence of Kachi Abadis, and has sought to formalize them based on the Kachi Abadis Improvement and Regularization Program. However, this is a process that's been incredibly slow and, incredibly painfully slow. Our research shows that residents in even non-regularized informal settlements still possess stamp paper-based documentation, and therefore merit legitimization by the state. The state also collects utility bills from these settlements, of water, gas, electricity. They can't be simply categorized as informal or illegal. We also studied the issue of housing, and it actually started at the time of independence, when Karachi faced this huge influx of migrants from India, and they were housed in informal settlements to be formally housed in formal settlements in the future, which never happened. And then in 1958, the military government under Ayub Khan made an attempt to tackle the urban poor of the city center by creating these two satellite towns of Orangi and Korangi. And in principle, satellite towns are supposed to be self-sufficient, but in this case, they materially weren't, because they lacked access to a lot of work opportunities. They were too far away. They also, in a lot of sectors, did not have electricity and sewage connections. So these communities then made their way back to the city centers and settled along nalas and roads. We learned that the power of the state extends beyond its, quote-unquote, legal right to show up at your door and evict you or demolish your house. Their power actually also seeps into the society's rationale that adds to the stigmatization of these groups as encroachers. Even Kachi Abadi is a colloquial term that is used to mean informal settlements. It carries an impression of impermanence and marginalization. In the case of the Gujjar and Orangi Nalas, the settlement's proximity to the trash as well and the sewage also added to their stigmatization. So what we learned was vocabulary was also a very important form of governmentality over the citizens. Now when we talk about the dilution of responsibility and all of this paperwork, we learned that there were a lot of institutions that were part of this. So we discovered that KMC was responsible for the demolitions, but they still wouldn't hear, any petitions or requests by the government. The affectees had, went through a really long process of struggle to even obtain the checks that were publicly promised to them. Petitions to request the government to stop evictions had little value unless they went on the file and became part of that, messy paper bureaucracy. Now this brings us to what is driving all of this. What is the plan for the city? To understand this, we have to follow capital, which is what is driving this development in the first place. And what we can trace it back to is this neoliberalism model that we've studied. And this is where it is slightly controversial perhaps to some, but we can trace it back to 2017 when the World Bank starts a series of funding packages for Karachi. And the one that's relevant to us is the Solid Waste Emergency and Efficiency Project, or Project Sweep. And before I go on, I do want to state that the World Bank vehemently denies being part of these demolitions, and which is fair. We can't prove that they have funded the demolitions along Karachi's nalas. But a lot of people, a lot of long-standing critics of the World Bank who acknowledge that World Bank development has led to evictions across city after city in the global south, one of them being veteran architect Arif Hassan, who's worked with the TGRC, who I mentioned before, who've done extensive work on why Karachi floods. These critics propose taking a more common sense perspective on this. They say that SWEEP, Project SWEEP, which is a World Bank project, is to clean the nalas. The state says the nalas can't be cleaned without demolishing the homes. So given the scale of the funding, there's no way to effectively say for sure how these funds are being used. Even in previous cases with the KNIP project, where the vendors, the informal vendors at Empress Market were evicted, the entire market was razed to the ground. That was a World Bank project as well. So, I mean, why why does the world, if it is against World Bank policy, why are these programs not completely and publicly stopped before the affectees are rehabilitated and reimbursed? Okay. Now, this brings us to the concept of the world-class city, which is being promoted in the 2020 master plan of Karachi. World-class city is, it's supposed to be an attractive economic center, and we want to ask, economy for who? Economic gains for who? There's a very distinct pattern that a global city follows. It's investment friendly, it's open to international investment, it caters to the international eye at the cost of local industry and livability. And what we saw was that the Karachi master plan does zone land based on its market value. So the areas that are zoned as the highest price, they fall into the central, the east, and the south districts of Karachi that are, of course, subject to the demands created by the real estate development that will inevitably attract foreign investment. So dealing with the flooding and other instances of climate change, as well as the issues of waste and sewage, also highlight how bourgeois environmentalism has penalized the poor for living alongside nalas. After the rains of August 2020, the government needed to be seen as taking action publicly, and that came in the form of clearing the Gujar and Urangi Nala settlements, even though no direct relationship was ever established. Thus, evictions were legitimized by the judiciary, gaining them this public general acceptance. And in the future, Karachi will have to reckon with the cost of displacing the marginalized working class to its peripheries. And we argue that this model of development is not sustainable. And our research has uncovered a myriad of mechanisms that the state uses to justify, and it proves that this resistance needs to be fought on all of these different fronts to untangle this inaccurate and unscientific narratives that are used to justify it. Thank you.